Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. How can we begin to gain hadith knowledge? That's the question that we pose to ourselves. The first thing is that we take a book like the complete 40 hadith of Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah. And we take that book and we try to understand the contents. Now Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah, he collected the 40 hadith. He collected half of them actually. Imam Ibn Salah collected about 25, and then Imam al-Nawawi collected the rest, and that became known as the 40 hadith collection. And those hadith are considered the most comprehensive hadith around. And so you take that book, you digest its meaning, try to memorize as many hadith from there as possible, if not all of them. And then you begin to read a book like Hadith Terminology and Classification by Dr. Rahawan. And you focus on that, and then from there you move to the compendium. The compendium is the explanation of what Hafid Ibn Rajab on the 40 hadith. So now you expand the commentary that you have. And then you begin to look at a book like Nukhbat al-Fikr and the explanation of Mufti Sayyid Palampuri, which is available online. And focus on the Nukhba really well. Become very familiar with his contents. And you should get some idea of how to deal with it from the contemporary book that you studied beforehand, which is Hadith Terminology and Classification. So then with the Nukhba, you begin to see in the Bulugh al-Maram by Hafid bin Hajar, how it is that Hafid bin Hajar classifies a hadith sometimes. Just become familiar. If you studied fiqh, then some of the hadith will ring a bell. You'll be able to You'll be able to see, oh, this madhab uses this hadith, or you'll be able to see how the hadith and the fiqh relate to one another if you studied fiqh. Preferably it's best to study with ulama, but if you can't, then you try to make an effort, right? And so in the meantime, you write your questions down in a systematic way. So first we said you begin with the complete 40 hadith, then with Hadith Terminology and Classification by Dr. Rahawan, then the Nukhbat al-Fikr, and then with the explanation of Sayyid Palampuri, and then you look at Bulugh al-Maram, become familiar with those type of hadith. Those hadith are different than what the hadith to be found in the 40 hadith. The hadith found in the Bulugh deal with what? Deal with ahkam or fiqh for the most part. And then you focus on a book like Riyadh al-Salihin. Riyadh al-Salihin will take you back to that same spirit that you found in the 40 hadith. Now you're going to talk about what you're going to encounter, what's going to be spoken about is virtuous deeds. You're going to get a hadith that relate to the heart. You're going to get a hadith that relate to brotherhood. You're going to get a hadith that relate to the virtue of actions. And so there you focus on reading those hadith, and you try to understand their meanings. How? By reading seerah. By reading seerah and see how the Prophet implemented, right? Preferably it's best to read with the commentary. Dar es Salaam published a version. It has some commentary, so it's not that bad. It's not the best, but it's not that bad. That's a good place to start. So then you go from there, and then you read the Muwatta of Imam Malik. You read the Muwatta of Imam Malik, because the Muwatta succinctly contains all of the Sahih Hadith that you find in other books, right? Even though the chain of transmission may not be what they call marfu', and you'll understand the concept of marfu' and the importance of a hadith being marfu' when you study hadith terminology. It means that a chain goes all the way back to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam without a break. And so then after that you become familiar with the abridged version of Bukhari, which in essence summarizes all of the hadith in Bukhari. In most of the hadith in Bukhari you find that there's repetition. So Alama Zabidi rahmatullahi alayhi, he eliminated the repetition and just give you the core. So you become familiar from there. And so the best is to study with explanation, but here we're becoming familiar at least with the hadith. Becoming familiar. So we go from the 40 hadith, right? We go from the 40 hadith to the Bulugh, to Riyadh al-Salihin, to the Muwatta, to the abridged version of Bukhari. And that's a good way to prepare yourself for further studies in hadith sciences. And then from there you study 2 books in hadith methodology, hadith classification by Muhammad Rahawan, and the Sharh of the Nukhba. Sharh of the Nukhba. If the Nukhba is digested and understood correctly, it's sufficient according to Imam Shawkani. According, if you're going to specialize in hadith, that's a different ballgame. But this should get you to have a sound basis. Allahu a'lam. Aqulu qawli hadha wa astaghfiru li wa lakum wa alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. And remember to consult the ulama. Remember to seek out the ulama